welcome to my GAMMANS Art YouTube channel. This week I've got two sunset pieces for you back to back to watch. I find these really exciting to film and show as well because I feel like the cloud composition is really interesting and affects how the whole piece comes together, so hopefully you'll think that was interesting too. I really hope you enjoy the video and thanks in advance for watching. So I'm mapping out the composition of the piece and putting the horizon line a little bit lower than I normally would, just because the clouds are going to be a main feature, so I want to give them enough room to really be the predominant focus in the painting as well as the sunset. What I'm doing here is building up the background colour, so I want the sunset to be really vivid and vibrant, so I'm using orange at the real base of it and then progressing slowly to yellow and then eventually to pink and then eventually to purple, which is going to be the background colour. So it's getting more and more intense as it's getting further and further towards the centre of the sunset. That technique of colour shading is something you'll see me do a lot, and it's basically my way of mirroring the intensity of the sunset, and where it's very intense towards the centre and the focal point, and then it sort of emanates and bursts outwards. It's my way of making sure the colours are reflective of that and mirror exactly what it is that I'm trying to create. So the intense colours will be at the bottom and they'll emanate out just as I'm trying to allude that the sunset is doing. The water and the reflections as well are going to mirror what's going on in the sky, so that means that the colours, I'm going to drag them down and almost reflect them in the water. Well, in fact, that's exactly what's going on. I am sort of reflecting the colours, and so they're going to also be progressively getting more purpley towards the edges, and they start very intense and bright near to where the sun is actually setting. To create the surrounding foliage, there's a few things that I like to bear in mind, and that is to use the similar colours that I'm using for the actual rocks in the background and the landscape. So don't introduce too many new colours, otherwise it can look a bit superimposed at the bottom, so that's really important. Another thing is that this is going to be a balancing technique for the rest of the piece, because the clouds above, which you'll see me do later, are going to give a sense of composition, and that needs to be balanced below. So that's what I'm doing here with the foliage at the bottom, and you'll see that at the end, that everything should balance out at the bottom. I've been really careful here as well to make sure that the shading of that foliage is not too severe, that it sort of blends quite nicely with the rest of the piece. Otherwise, again, it's going to look superimposed and not like it's part of the painting, so that's really important too. What I'm doing here with the landscape area and the below the landscape area is really important, because I am almost mirroring what the clouds are doing. So I'm going to be putting in purple clouds, which you'll see soon, and I'm mirroring that down so that that reflection is going to be present in the piece, and you'll see that once you've seen the clouds that I'm doing up the top. But that purple also acts as a really important balancing tool as well. The outskirts of the scene are also where I like to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more abstract as well. You'll see that with a lot of my cityscapes, but particularly for the seascapes and sunscapes, I really enjoy making these areas at the bottom. You can see I'm using the drips there, a little bit more dramatic and a little bit more abstract, because it doesn't take away from the focal point of the piece, but it really adds something. It's quite interesting at the bottom, and I feel like it takes the work from just being firmly in one genre to touching on another. And the challenge there is as well about combining those different genres too. As well as balancing out the piece, the foliage also is really important to harmonise the rest of the piece compositionally with the very obvious horizontal lines and accents that are happening in the picture. So the horizontal line that runs almost around the centre is really stealing a lot of the focus, because it's right in the centre, it's right where your eye is drawn to. Also, the bottom of those clouds you can just see now, everything is very horizontally accented. So those vertical lines where the little drips have formed, and also you'll see me add some more vertical lines in later and I'll point them out, are really important for creating composition and harmony in the piece. And that is mainly done through balancing of those vertical and horizontal accents. My favourite thing to do in these pieces is the actual sunset, because it is so fundamental to the piece. It brightens up the whole thing, it adds a focal point, and it's also really fun to do. It's also very textured as well, which is something I really love to play around with. I really enjoy creating impasto sections of work. So you can see me do that there with a palette knife, and that's the finished piece. There's a similar thing going on here which I didn't show you in the last piece, which is the tape measure, and I use that in pretty much every piece, because although it's good to rely on my natural eye sometimes, it can also be really good to just check that I'm sort of following the rules which I've made for myself, but I know that, oh, it looks good if I do it 2/3 of the way down, and I can measure that out. Or, you know, I like the horizon line to be, you know, a similar distance from the top of the piece to the bottom of the piece, etc., etc. Sometimes just having the formality of an accurate measuring device, such as a tape measure, can really help to shape the creativity in a really, really positive way, and just make sure that I'm not off track. Another technique you'll see me do a lot is to draw out things and mark out things first with a paintbrush, and you'll see me do that with the foliage here at the bottom. And it's just the same as doing a preliminary sketch. If I were to draw buildings or whatever, I would sketch them out first, and it's really, really important just to get a sense of the composition and the balance and how the piece is going to look before you start putting the paint on. Because once you start adding paint to things, it just complicates it a lot, and it can be a lot more difficult to rework things if you need to. Finally, I'm adding in that detail with the palette knife and adding vertical accents to, again, what is a very horizontally predominant piece. And they're really to represent a sense of life at the back of the picture. And there you are, that's the finished piece. So there you go, those are the sunset pieces. I really, really hope you enjoyed watching. As per usual, please do comment and leave a question, and don't forget to like and subscribe the channel on your way out. Thank you.